Backwards a little bit.
What do you want to be in it? The screen?
Okay.
That's alright.
So this session is called How Can Citizens... Are you here? No. Do you want the microphone? Do we work? Okay, so I'll start again. Welcome to the session. It's broadly on two themes. Psychologists trying to approach the economics, the economy, those questions, and building campaigns and movements and the issues that we encounter in trying to do that. I'm Mark, I'm from Steady State Manchester, and we have Sally and Tamsin from Psychologists Against Austerity. We just thought it would be interesting to kind of compare and contrast our work and our approach to some of these issues and yours. So we'll try and engage you quite a bit in the session. There'll be a little bit of talking back, but not too much of it. Over to Tamsin for the first little exercise.
Okay, Can you hear me okay? Because I'm just going to invite, I thought we just find out a little bit about who's in the room and how people connect with these kind of themes and whether it feels relevant. Sorry for eating, but I'd like to invite you for a moment to put that aside, and if you're happy to stand up, it'll just be a few minutes of your feet. I'm just going to ask you a few questions, and I'd like you to think about arranging yourself in the room according to how you feel like you relate to the question. So the first thing I want to ask is how much, I don't know what you do or sort of how many practitioners, but thinking about either the work you do, the people that you work with, or maybe some aspects of people in your life, how much you think sort of political decisions and the issues around the economy impact on your work, the people that you work with, or people in your communities. So if that's something that's really current in your thinking and you struggle with or you're very aware of day to day, I'd like you to sort of move up towards that in that direction. If it's not something that's really present and pressing and you don't think about it that much, it doesn't feel like the most relevant thing, then down that end. So those are the two extremes, and then you can sort of find a space, a continuum around it. And if you're not comfortable, you can opt out, maybe stand on the chairs with your Quite a lot.
What was the question?
Did you face austerity and what?
So then I'd just like to ask, how much does that inform your practice or the sort of decisions you do, and if it does, I'm not here, if you feel like you wish it did, but for whatever reason it doesn't at all, way down here, and then there's a continuum on the spectrum.
Practice of psychology or the practice, whatever you're involved in, more generally at a wider level. So you think it informs psychology practice and thinking a lot at this end through to not very much or not enough at that? Yeah, so how much do you think the practice of psychology is informed by social and political context in the economy?
Maybe the theory.
I know not everyone here is psychologist.
You can have a view as a non-psychologist.
So, does someone want to say something about why they stood down this end of the room? Do you want to say something about why you stood at this end of the room?
Because most psychological models, I think, don't include the economic and political way of understanding the person we're working with. It's more about their family history or the way they think, rather than the world of society.
Treat the individual rather than the situation the individual then.
Yeah. And so you want to say something about what this end looks like? Or why you put yourselves at this end?
I think the politics, on whichever definition you have that with, big P or small p, I think it does influence day-to-day action. It certainly influences the governance and some of the structures. It certainly influences the laws that we work through. But I'm not a psychologist, I'm an artist, but it does, it colours. I use that framework.
Can I just pick up on the influence? I'd like to sort of think about how much influence you feel that you have, or how much say that you have on how we organise ourselves as a society and thinking about economics, but also how that happens. So if you feel that you have some sort of influence or voice, that meaningful voice on how the economy is structured or run up this end, if you feel like you have absolutely no impact on it, and again it's you might have different roles.
Jump out.
So it looks like people think they have some influence over economic and social policy, but nobody's up this end. And then some people feel relatively removed from how economic and social policy is created. Is that fair?
We get
something from that?
I'd like to say that we are led to believe that we have an impact on society and I feel policy and stuff, but after that we probably don't as a whole. Maybe on like grassroots if you get really in that small level or something, but on the larger scale probably not.
Should we do one last one?
Yes, it's much.
Does anyone want to say anything from this end, or feeling like you have more influence?
I think as an individual, we probably have less influence in the schools.
Okay, so if we join a group, then we've got more.
So when we're collective, so if you're thinking of yourself as a group and a collective, maybe a bit more, if we think about ourselves as more separated,
It's easy to ignore one voice, but
yeah.
it's not, you can ignore a collective voice, but the more people that are in the collective, the harder it is, the voice gets louder and louder, and it's hard to ignore that voice.
Yeah. So this leads on to my next question, which is how many people here feel that they are active, have some sort of community or group, or whether it's a campaign group or a group that they work with or are active with? How active do you feel you are in trying to have an impact or have a say, whether it's through activism or other means? So if you feel that, if you identify personally as someone who you think that you're quite active and you're doing it a lot, then that's about
social and economic policy making.
Sorry, yeah.
But how active you are in social and economic policy making in whatever ways, campaigns, research, whatever it might be. That's very active, right at that end. Okay, great.
Are you talking about social politics?
Either, however if you feel you have a voice in shaping local or national economic and social policy, how active you feel you are in that, in whatever role you have. Okay, well we hope that by the end of this session we might squeeze everyone a little bit this way by different forms, and we're going to say we're going to give a little, so please sit down, thank you very much. We're going to, Mark, Tamsin and I are going to talk to you a little bit about ways that we can
Where do you want it? Depends where this is.
from our experience with Tamsin and I's experience from Psychologists against Austerity and Mark's experience in steady state Manchester. There'll be ways in the last sort of 5-10 minutes we've got some questions to put back to you to have a think about how you could generate your own ideas around this. And we're going to give a little bit of history about how things arose and so some of the campaign and strategy and tactics we've been using in ways that we've tried to influence an economy for a better future, which I think is our title.
Okay, let's get cracking then. So, first of all, we're going to look at the origins and evolution of the collaboration that we're involved in, including its core messages and ideology. So, I'm going to ask Tamsin and Sally to say something a bit about Psychologists for Austerity, what you're trying to do, what your message is, how you got started.
So Psychologists for Austerity really came out of the Community Psychology Network, and more specifically the London branch, that was coming together and meeting on a sort of regular-ish basis, from a desire to be doing some kind of political action or political involvement, which is active as well as thinking about and talking to be active. So the idea was to start with challenging the narratives around austerity that we saw happening in at that time the coalition government, and the impact that was having on people that a lot of members of the group were working with, and the communities that we're living in, and thinking about how that's impacting on well-being in communities, and really wanting to contribute to the campaigns and actions that are happening around challenging the austerity and austerity narratives. Do you want to say something more?
Yeah, I think this lived experience of being in services where there were both cuts happening to the services that we were working in, whilst also seeing the impact of other welfare reforms, of other impacts of austerity more widely on the people that we were working alongside in our communities as service users, and the lived experience of what that feels like for both us and for others, and for the people using our services. Something I'm sure you might all be familiar with. There was a discussion about what do we add as, what are we bringing that's unique in our roles as psychologists, what are we seeing, what can we add. We wanted to be this idea of activist practitioners, what can we bring, what legitimacy, what power do we have, who can we influence. These are the sorts of questions that we started to debate around. Should we be acting as psychologists? Should we be just any mental health practitioner? What is our identity? What is our legitimacy?
Can I say a little bit then about State Manchester, rather than showing you the slide to take more time? There's our pop-up, tells you a bit about it. Probably, if we were doing it now, because that's a couple of years old, we would write it a little differently. But the basic idea was that the dominant model of the economy, which is what's good in the economy, is based on the idea of the economy continuing to grow forever and ever. That was highly flawed. Firstly, and perhaps most importantly, it's flawed on ecological grounds, because of the International Panel Climate Change again reiterated only last year. Economic growth is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions and hence climate change. But also it's highly flawed on social and economic justice grounds. I won't go into that in too much detail. There's, again, a fair amount of evidence that continued economic growth leads to more poverty, more inequality, more destitution in certain areas, and accelerating high incomes in others. So it's a real problem. And we wanted to do something about that, but focused on Greater Manchester, on what we're now have to call the Northern Powerhouse, possibly the Northern Poorhouse, but that's kind of our focus. We're trying to make it concrete, practical, at a local-ish level. Let's go on to the next question. You're going to ask the question.
So how did you, in State Manchester, how did you build participation, how did you build momentum around the campaign?
Yeah, I mean, we worked more as a small, tight, I guess somewhat elite collective, self-selected and selected. So, and we're currently sort of transforming into a membership organisation. But that means that our strategy was very much to get our own ideas sorted out. And it was very much in the context of the local council. and challenging their economic development model. And Manchester City dominates this city region, so what Manchester says tends to go. And we wanted to engage with that. But again, have some arguments, you know, some well-researched work. So we produced sort of major reports, well-researched and so on, and we went into those kinds of contexts with the council, the scrutiny committee, some of the key people, and had discussion with them. We found opportunities for doing that. But we involved a wider group of allies. So building on various kinds of circulationalists, various networks, from both the green community, but also the social justice and economic justice communities locally. We brought people together. So when we went to present to the scrutiny committee, economic scrutiny committee in the council, we brought with us other people, and they'd done some lobbying already in council. So it was trying to build that movement and, I suppose, frame some other campaigns and struggles within the overall narrative of economic, social and ecological justice all wrapped up together. What about you?
That's a good interview, we took a different stance in that we decided that we did have something unique to say as psychologists or mental health practitioners, that we did have a unique perspective on things, and that we wanted to use that within our campaigning and activism. So slightly different to Steady State Manchester in that way. We wanted to build momentum within our field. So we took on two major strategies to build that momentum.
So in terms of our aims, so what we really wanted to mobilise psychologists, so to mobilise the community of practice around us into becoming more active and having more of a voice in what's happening politically. But also to mobilise psychological knowledge to feed into the narrative, to come into the conversation in the wider public debate and discourse, in the media and politicians' thinking. And in a way we were using these partly as thinking about the resources that we had as a very small group of people who cared a lot about these issues, and we really said, well, what can we do as this particular group? And as Sally said, well, we are, most of the group, not all are identifying as psychologists. So how do we use that to add, rather than just going to lots of demos as individual citizens, but can we actually make use of this identity group in a way to have a sort of a more of an influence and a different kind of sway in the public debate? So.
And in doing that then, so moving on rapidly, that's the kind of the constituency that we're trying to engage and mobilise, but who's your audience?
Well, we decided that if then you're talking internally, psychologists need to be talking to policymakers. So we wrote a briefing paper that could actually be used by any audience. So this is part of our mobilising psychological knowledge. So as a group, we wrote a very short but really great. It wasn't me, it was straight on. That's if I can say that. They wrote a really great paper about how austerity has a direct impact on people's mental ill health. And we wrote it as a briefing paper so it would be used by any other campaigning organisation to further their cause and their arguments. And also could be used as the audience being our policymakers. So we encouraged psychologists to take this briefing paper in the run-up to the general election in 2015, take this to their candidates, take this to hustings, use it, use the ideas, use the evidence-based thinking, and ask and get involved at a policy, local and national level. So our audience really could be anyone, but initially we were focusing on how we mobilise psychologists and then how they can then mobilise their knowledge and understanding within their local communities and within their local politics.
And a hard one now then, in doing that, what have you learned about framing your message?
Well, I was sort of just thinking about one aspect. I don't know, I think this speaks to that question, I'm not sure, but you might have asked again. But one of we were sort of conscious, coming from a more community-oriented perspective, and wanting to think more collectively about these issues, we were conscious of not sort of simply asking for more funding for mental health. We were actually trying to challenge economic change more broadly, so we're not just a group of psychologists saying we need more money for our services. And secondly, not just reinforcing a kind of assumptions and maybe a certain aspect of the way in which mental well-being or mental health is talked about, but a lot of our group are more critical of, rather than pathologising and individualising. And what we are trying to do is also challenge the sort of that idea that there's the individualising of social problems. So really drawing attention to the social determinants and the cultural and social and political context of distress and well-being. And so there was a sort of a line to tread in the language that we were using in the briefing paper, and sort of thinking about how we sort of draw attention to that.
Yeah.
But moving swiftly on.
It's okay, thank you. And I'm just going to share one kind of insight about our framing of the message, which was that we started off with this notion of the steady state economy and growth is bad. And we kind of realised fairly rapidly that, and we're trying to influence sort of decision makers, influential people, that saying that we were against growth basically led to a sort of shutting of the eyelids and kind of a closing down of discussion, because people couldn't step outside that paradigm, that model. So although we don't compromise on that, we're very clear that we can't reconcile growth with the ecological, social and economic benefits that we want to see. But we try to present a more positive message, and we talk about the viable economy, viable in ecological, economic and social terms, talking about some of the positive things. And when we talked about positive policies before, on a number of different fronts, distribution, measurement of well-being, relocalising the economy, finance, debt and credit, those kinds of things. But now we kind of frame that and reframe that within this notion of viable economy, which seems to resonate. People seem to get it, and they seem to be more up for it in a way we kind of want to compromise on that while moving on in that compromise. Rapidly, let's get on to you lot doing the work on this.
To what, sorry? Oh, yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, what did you do?
I thought we were going to go on to the...
Yeah, okay. We've been a bit short of time, sorry.
Yeah.
Is there anyone want us to expand on anything very quickly about psychologists against austerity? We can wait till the end.
You have a strategic action plan with your website. They are the briefing paper.
Yeah.
So what's the plan? We have a plan of action.
So what I'd say about that is we've got go onto our website, Psychologists Against Austerity, and there's a whole idea of what the strategy is going forward. Join the working groups. There's loads of ways of getting involved. We don't need to know.
And we have actually, the briefing paper was sort of the beginning strategy, and actually we've done quite a lot of other things which we would go through if we had time. But it is on the website, most of that.
So that's one key message you wanted to take home with what would that be?
Well, we'll do this, and then maybe put it back together.
Yeah, let's have a conversation with all of us.
Yeah.
Rather than, So, Sally.
Okay, so if you want to get into small groups, the idea is just to get you thinking about, from what you've heard and from having this space, to get you thinking about ways that you could be involved in some of these movements, create your own movement, who do you have influence over. So if we thought you could get into a small group, pick an issue, a social change issue or something that you're passionate about, or pick something that we've discussed, what you would do if you were involved in Psychologists Against Austerity, and just answer these questions, because this is what we found to be really important to be thinking about if you are trying to build a movement in this area. Who else do you know that shares this perspective and who could work with you? So we've been linked in with Economists Against Austerity, we've linked in with Mental Health Resistance Network, Disabled People Against the Cuts, for example, and we've built partnerships with them. Who do you know that might be persuaded to join your campaign? So we've managed to persuade, we trying to do a lot of work with BPS and Jamie Happy Hughes as the president to get him thinking, not necessarily using those banners, to get him thinking about social justice more generally, and he's picked up on that and is doing his own thing as well. So that's another example. Who else do you really need to engage with? Because they're already working on this, or they could help, or they could block you. So who else would you like to be, who do you need to engage in whatever it is that you're discussing? So Mark gave a really good example there about how to engage others that might block if they thought it was about no growth, but turning it into a viable economy. So those are some of our examples, but would you mind doing this for 10 minutes? So yeah, do you want to split however you want to split? Like it looks like there's really 5 groups. One of you might have to persuade the others to take on your...
We can keep it fairly low.
So we've got, should we put 15 minutes? 10 minutes.
So that.
Let's not an issue that
Got it. How's that? I've got a few other groups in. Or if I put it a bit, put it over here. Yeah? Is that good? So if I just put it
in the job centre.
There's 2 agendas there.
It's a bit like you want to have therapy or something like that, even if you don't want it. But, yeah, otherwise you're going to speak. Yeah.
And some of the participation is to, for instance, some of the employment skills training to become more
So what would you like to see done? You give me a good context then. So, you want to have it somewhere else first.
Now, in the evidence I talked about aims to feel psychology sits down and looks at like this.
You might have, what about the odious argument? Because we need to have some sort of, if we agree that it's not a good idea, then we say, well, it truly is a good idea in terms of being unemployed, getting them help, getting back into working, doing some job skills. So, but if you're talking about it to do with where you locate, it's a crucial thing. Well, what they're doing though is making mental health services more accessible, making it so that it's no longer stigmatised in a particular clinical environment. It's what you want to find. Is the argument though, how can we argue against that? Right.
So this is also an issue going to see a therapist.
But then on the other hand, if you do that, yeah, it's not like you're going to do that, you have the risk that people are truthful and not doing it because it's very different in the best. There is a contradiction here. There is a point to do it.
Okay, we've got another 30 seconds. So we're just going to ask you to summarise, like a parting recommendation.
So each group, give us a parting shot from your discussion, just one sentence, no more. To everybody, yes. So think about that. Did you get that? So well,
Five words? 5 words.
The pressure So, one of us can stand up. Okay, everybody, listen. Who's going first? This group. Okay. Closing shot. Okay, right. Listen. Yeah, why not? Well, unless you can talk really loud.
Yes. Do you want the issue itself, or said about it?
Whatever you think is relevant.
Okay. Well, the issue we picked was that there's a plan for CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy therapists or psychologists to work in the job centre. So this is a problem because it means that people who access welfare benefits payments will need to show that they want to work, they need to engage with the services and the job services, but if they're not engaging, then they can be sent to the psychologist. So the psychologist becomes part of the machine to make someone go back to work.
Thank you. I counted 5 clauses in that sentence. Next.
So we talked about exactly the same issue I guess to add to it, we were thinking about the next step, and we were thinking there's already some groups that are working on those, such as mental health assistance network and disabled people against cuts. And so rather than kind of starting something different, how could we use our position as kind of psychologists to add to that message, strengthen that message, to evidence that message from a kind of psychology.
Actually, I like the PowerPoint backup stuff. But we were talking about the issues of focus Islamophobia and thinking that other groups that share that perspective would be included on that hate campaign and faith groups have stood against it. We thought that university students would be quite persuaded to join that campaign because it's going to transfer a lot of them about having kind of their thinking under control by the state, and we were trying to not close with the government presented anyway.
Thank you very much. These are wonderfully long sentences, aren't they?
Great.
Everyone said.
We feel that we can demonstrate by art a sustainable economic case for promoting the green economy, the positive promotion of the green economy.
Art and environment is very important.
Next group.
So we chose to look
Loud.
Okay, we want the criminal justice system and health to join up and bring health more in to improve the lives of prisoners with mental health problems.
Okay, thank you. And we all get a parting shot because we're participation. We're much more important. Tamsin.
Yeah. I just would like to say it's really interesting these two groups interested in that because we are talking to some of the groups that we've partnered with about those issues. So there will be some organising around that. So if anyone's interested around the CBT and job centres and the encroachment of governments into the psyche, that's great. In terms of, I'm going to pass the time so we get a double shot.
Just to say, there's lots of groups, an international network now of people involved with regional groups, so come and get involved if you can. There's working groups online, as we spoke about. But I guess I would say make sure you're talking to the external world. That's my learning. It's no good as psychologists, just we need to get psychological ideas out there. And unless you're talking to the press, unless you're talking to MPs, unless you're talking to policymakers, we went to meet the Shadow Minister for Mental Health last week, and she's really interested in community psychology. So there's opportunities out there, they are listening if you go to them.
So what would mark as a success for this campaign? Would it be that the current government stopped...
End austerity.
Yeah, but is it that simple? Because I don't think they're likely to be doing that in the foreseeable future.
Okay, that's for the coffee break. My parting shot is that if you want to know more about Surrey State Manchester, talk to me. There's also some leaflets downstairs. There's also a website, which the URL up there. And changing the subject, if you've got strong feelings about how good this session was or how awful it was, please do speak individually to one of us. We'd like to learn from doing it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Downstairs meeting.